Welcome to Season 3 of the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast. My name is Amy Wheeler, and I'm your host. We are so happy to tell you all that's happening in the world of yoga therapy, and we love to find guests from all over the world so that we can share and learn and grow together. Some of the things that are happening in Season 3 that we find so exciting is that not only are we continuing with the free gift that we are giving out every single week in Season 2, and you can see more about that in the show notes. But now we are adding a YouTube channel, and you can see all of these podcasts on video. The YouTube channel is called Optimal State with Amy Wheeler. Some people like to watch video. Maybe you want to use it for one of your trainings. These videos on YouTube will be there for you to use for free. We would love your support. We have opened up a Patreon page that is going to help the podcast flourish and grow. You can help us to expand and grow and create more content for you. And we'd love for you to visit the Patreon page, which is called Optimal State and Yoga Therapy Hour podcast. So let's go into our guest today, and please nourish yourself, take time for yourself, and really relax into listening to the podcast. Hello, today I interview Nina Zolotow, and many of you may know Nina because she has done Yoga for Healthy Aging blog for years and years, which she and Baxer Bell, who many of you know, turned into a book, Yoga for Healthy Aging. Nina also has helped Timothy McCall to bring about his book called Saving My Neck, which is about oral cancer, something that's now become very close to my heart also. So I'm sure you have seen and felt and heard Nina throughout the years, but you may not have met her personally. She's an excellent writer. Shambhala is her publisher, and I think they could see that her writing skill is beyond what most of us could ever dream of. And when Nina asked me if maybe it would be a good match for the podcast to talk about her new book called Yoga for Times of Change, at first I was a little hesitant because, as some of you know, I try not to do just yoga on this podcast. I really try to link things for the most part into yoga therapy. But the more that I read about Nina's book or, different chapters, I thought this is very, very close to yoga therapy. And the difference is that there's not a formal assessment like we have in yoga therapy. In yoga therapy, we're going to assess you physically. How is your range of motion? How is your strength? How is your flexibility? How is your balance? We're going to assess you on the subtle body, more physiologically, maybe your nervous system functioning or dysfunctioning, your insomnia, your digestion. In the initial assessment and ongoing assessment, we're going to look at your mental fluctuations and the places you tend to go, whether it's anxiety, depression, fear, anger. We're going to look at your personality, your communication style, your ability or inability to connect. We're going to look at your connection to your spiritual life, if you choose to define that for yourself. So, in yoga therapy, we have a very thorough assessment process, which is what we learn about in yoga therapy school. And then we set goals together, co-negotiated goals, and we track progress over time towards those goals using the tools of yoga therapy. That's kind of the definition of yoga therapy. Now, Nina did not write this book for yoga therapy, but I was so pleasantly surprised to see so many of the concepts of yoga therapy woven through her book, whether she knew it or intended it or not. It really had a lot of crossover. So in some ways, it's a sticky situation because what is yoga? What is yoga therapy? But I don't like to pit the two of those against each other. We are one yoga family, and yoga therapy is a niche within the larger body of yoga, right? So yoga is the family and, yoga therapy is the auntie, right? Within the family. So I don't think we need to think about them being separate. There's a lot of crossover. And as you listen to this interview, I think you're going to have some really nice reflections about yoga and yoga therapy and how it can be used to help people suffer during times of change, which in my opinion, this is a very timely book because with all the changes that are going on in society, with everything, you name it, personally, professionally, societally, politically, we are in a time of change. I think it's really hard for people. I think it's hard to have all these external forces working on us. And some people don't feel self-empowered. They don't feel sovereign inside of themselves to deal with all the external chaos that's going on. And so I think if there's one thing that both yoga and yoga therapy are helping us to try to get a handle on, that is self-empowerment, that I can look at my state and realize that I'm not at my best or I'm maybe out of balance. And I have tools and technologies within me that I can use to feel better. And therefore I am sovereign. And that's what yoga is all about, is helping us come to that place of feeling self-empowered, recognizing through self-regulation, self-awareness, and maybe even self-actualization, recognizing who we really are and that we can be in control of our emotions even when everything is feeling rather out of control. All right, so let's go meet Nina. Today, I would like to introduce you to someone who's written a really amazing book for these times. Welcome to Nina Zolotow. How are you today, Nina?
Good. How are you?
Great. I'm feeling happy to talk about this book. I feel like it's such a perfect book for these times. I'll show a picture. Just came out on June 14th, 2022. And it's called Yoga for Times of Change, Practices and Meditations for Moving Through Stress, Anxiety, Grief, and Life's Transitions. So why did you write this book, Nina? Because you were writing this book maybe before all of these big changes that have been hitting lately happened.
That's true. I came up with the idea before the pandemic because my editor at Shambhala actually invited me to write a book by myself. And I'd never gotten an invitation like that before. So it seemed like something I couldn't pass up. And I had to think for a while, though, about what I wanted to write about. And I realized that I had a lot of information that I've been collecting and teaching for like the last 20 years, at least, about emotional healing and about how to kind of navigate life's ups and downs with more equanimity, because it was my own personal journey. And then as I began to learn, I also wanted to share what I learned with other people. So I had a lot of information on the blog about that. And I had information, that's the Yoga for Healthy Aging blog, that is. And I had a lot of information that I taught small groups or whatever, but I realized I'd never really written about it in a sort of collected way. And I think I got the idea for framing it in terms of change and uncertainty and all that from reading various Buddhist books about that. I think it's a really important topic, but when I looked at the Buddhist books about it, I always saw that they just offered meditation and philosophy. And I realized that yoga had a lot of other things to offer as well that weren't covered in those books. So I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of pull it all together under the idea of what I was thinking of as yoga for adapting to and accepting change. So that was my original idea in 2019 when I proposed the idea to my editor, and she really loved it. It took a while to actually get the proposal accepted and all that. So by the time I signed the contract, It was actually April of 2020. So just after the pandemic had started. And I had started writing the book beforehand because I had a pretty good idea it was going to be accepted because she was so enthusiastic about it. So that was how the timing worked out.
And then it sounds like you got to kind of maybe use some of this pandemic as food. I mean, if you were just really committing fully to this right when the pandemic hit, and now we've been over 2 years.
Yeah.
Sounds like you spent a good part of the pandemic writing this.
Yeah, I wrote the bulk of it in the pandemic and went into this amazing space during it. But definitely the pandemic and also the things that happened that first year where there was a lot of political turmoil. And then also like out in California, as you must know, we had an extreme fire season. Those things all affected my thinking about change and impermanence and how we experience them. Because I think before my orientation had been really more towards like the personal changes we all go through in our lives, which I like refer to as the rocky road ice cream of life, with the sweet marshmallows and the hard nuts, like divorce and losing someone we love, maybe losing a job, even positive things like getting married, moving to a new place, all those kinds of challenges that we go through. But it quickly became clear to me that just the power of community changes, global changes, and so on, like the pandemic, like political turmoil, like, climate change. And, then now we have the war going on. And all of these things can affect us quite, they affect our lives in everyday ways, whether it means we can't see people we used to see, or they affect our stress levels because we're worried about people close to us, or even people not close to us, a group of people who are suffering in some part of the world. And all that can, cause a lot of stress and anxiety and grief and anger and all those feelings, as well as what we experience personally.
I just can't tell you, both teaching at the university, but also my private clientele, the amount of emotions that people are trying to digest and process, and it just keeps coming. It feels like an avalanche. Many of the young people, especially, I know they just feel like giving up. So I have a question for you. What is it that makes change so hard for us?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I like to look at how human beings evolved in order to understand this. Because when humans were evolving, we're like hardwired to react to danger as quickly as possible with either aggressive or evasive responses. That's what helped us survive. Someone who's happy all the time, feels safe all the time, and comfortable all the time is going to be eliminated from the gene pool pretty quickly. So we have these built-in reactions to change, because any kind of change could be a potential danger for us. And when we encounter change, it triggers unpleasant emotions in us to get us to kind of react to that with either fear, anger, or regret, because that is what impels us to do something about the situations. So that's a big one, the fight, flight, or freeze response that we get in response to change, anything new. So, I like to use the example of me getting married as a change that was positive even. And I didn't even have a big wedding or anything. I was just going to get married to the man I was already living with. And I was still kind of a nervous wreck because it was a big change, even though it was a happy one. And then, obviously some other big change, like you suddenly lose your job or whatever, you're going to have a strong reaction to that instead of just being happy, because it's, it's a situation that you need to deal with and your nervous system is telling you, do something about this, right?
Yeah, the kind of safety, security balance gets disrupted, and that's painful to us.
Right. Yeah, the pain comes from your nervous system really wanting you to do something about it, right? So it's not just like your mind going, oh, this is not great, but because like your nervous system is not very smart. at all. So any kind of change it pretty much interprets as like life-threatening. So, we do encounter life-threatening situations in our everyday lives. They always like to talk about primitive times and the things that we used to encounter, right? They always go back to that. But in modern times, we do too. Like, if your house catches on fire, you need to do something right away. Or like for us, an earthquake or something, you're like, you need to like get shelter. So your nervous system prompts you to take action. So that's what the strong feelings are all about, to get you to act right away. But, if you have to do public speaking, for example, and you're terrified about that, that's not really life-threatening, but your nervous system doesn't know the difference.
So I want to ask you, this may be off topic, just say, no thanks if this isn't interesting to you, but I feel like those kind of fight, flight, fear, freeze happens kind of in the old brain, the parts of us that are trying to keep us safe. But we as humans have this prefrontal cortex, which is what meditation helps us develop. And through our prefrontal cortex, we can use it to our advantage. And I'll just give you an example. When I've had a big loss or a big shift, a huge change, if you will, in my life, my first response is freezing, and my nervous system is like, no, I don't want this. But I've learned to be able to use my prefrontal cortex, more my thinking brain, to tell myself, well, this could open up a new door. And the thing that you were doing in the first place was, maybe feeling a little old or stale or stuck. Maybe it's okay that that's getting swept away. And there's all this opportunity and spaciousness now. So what do you think of that, using kind of our newer brain to talk ourselves out of that fight, flight, freeze response?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have multiple parts of our brain doing different things at the same time. That's something I just learned about recently, the modular theory of the brain. So, but I mean, I think we all experience that. And so, yeah, at the same time that you're having these strong emotional reactions, you can use the witness part of your mind to notice what you're feeling. And I really encourage people to do that. That's, as a self-inquiry process, both, in the moment, if you can, by pausing and kind of really noticing what you're feeling and evaluating it. And then also later on, when you have more time, to like really look at your feelings and not think of them as negative either, but thinking of them as messages to you. But at some point you decide, like, is this really a danger or not? Because, sometimes there is a real danger and you want to do something about it. Maybe you're angry at the way people of color have been treated in our society. And that's a message to, actually do something about it. But then sometimes, as you said, maybe you're just getting upset about a change or situation that isn't really life-threatening or dangerous to you or someone you care about, in which case then you can use your mind to work with the thoughts that you're having and the feelings you're having, and maybe let go of them, as you said. Or like one of the suggestions I use for working with those types of feelings, when you realize that they're not helping you and they're actually counterproductive to your situation, is like cultivating the opposite from the Yoga Sutra. So that's what it sounds like you're doing, right? You're saying, no, this, not think of this particular situation as a danger, as a situation to be afraid or angry or whatever about, but yeah, thinking of it differently. So you're kind of replacing the thoughts that your nervous system are prompting with thoughts coming from another part of you.
Yeah. And in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, we call that Pratipaksha Bhavana, right? Getting a new perspective. I wanted to read from your book on page 94. It's a section on responding in the moment to anger. And you're talking about this idea of kind of witnessing yourself before you react. And you have a really nice quote from Beth Gibbs that I'd like to read. It says, "This is how Beth Gibbs describes her experience with witnessing herself during a burst of anger. Physically, it felt like a volcano, spewing boiling red lava in my belly. I noticed my breath. It was shallow and stuck in my chest. Energetically, I felt heavy, tight, constricted. Mentally, of course, I was seething. The act of witnessing was like being in the eye of the hurricane. It calmed me, and I was able to watch my anger settle on its own. I thought that was a really great description for, how it is that we feel when we have a loss or a disappointment or expectations aren't met. So there's two techniques already. Number one, just witnessing it. And then number two, cultivating the opposite. But I think a lot of what you're writing about in this book is the actual asana, right? That there are things we can do with our bodies to work through anger or anxiety or fear. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? It's not just
Yeah, I think that's what's really true. I mean, I think that's why, I realized that yoga hadn't really been discussed in terms of the ways it can help you with change, because so for one thing, with the asanas, and that's just been so powerful for me in particular, not just working with my thoughts. I include that in the book because I think that's part of it. But really, sometimes, especially if you're too upset about something, you really can't think clearly. I don't know if you've experienced that, but that's something I learned from Dan Libby, the psychologist who works with the veterans, about how the fight, flight, or freeze response actually affects what we're thinking about. So, because we sort of focus on strategies for fighting or fleeing, and we're not really thinking about other options, as you said. So a lot of times before you can really evaluate your situation or even work with your thoughts or whatever, you need to calm yourself down or lift yourself up a little bit. That's why I think the yoga stress management practices are so essential for whatever emotion that you're experiencing. So I have a lot of suggestions for those in the book.
Can I say something about that? I really appreciated that I was reading a chapter on anger and how to work with anger in an embodied way, but also mentally with the prefrontal cortex, as we just discussed. But in the chapter, it said, hey, by the way, you might go back to chapter 3 on stress management, because it sounds to me like if your baseline level of stress is causing you to be completely contracted most of the day, then just about anything is going to throw you over the edge. And that maybe a big part of the solution to anger or anxiety or depression or fear is to just work to bring your entire baseline down every day, every hour, as a new way of living. Would you say that's accurate?
I totally agree with that. I think that's so important. When I started the Yoga for Healthy Aging blog, it was over 10 years ago. And I had stress management as such an important topic as related to Yoga for Healthy Aging for health reasons and also for mental health reasons. And, over the years, I've even become more convinced that that's just the number one thing that yoga has to offer. And learning how to do that and practice that way is just so beneficial for all those things. I was talking to my cousin about it because she was getting really stressed out lately and she couldn't figure out why. Some things about her house that she was remodeling kind of set her off. And I said, I think it's because your baseline stress levels are so high, because she couldn't really understand, why am I getting so upset about this? And I think it's because your baseline stress levels are so high. And then she said, oh, I get it. She came up with the best metaphor. She said, it reminds me of pouring tea into a cup that's already full. So as you add more tea, it overflows. And I'm like, that's it exactly. If you can keep your baseline stress levels lower, then when a stressful situation or a challenging situation comes up, you're not going to react as strongly. You have more room left before you really go over the edge. And for anger, I totally agree. If you're stressed out, I think we all notice this in our home life, if we're stressed out about something, things can just irritate us more easily, or we can lose our temper more with our family or whatever, just for no reason, or a reason that normally wouldn't set us off. So we can tend to move into anxiety or anger or even depression when our stress levels are chronic and too high.
The way that I love, the words they're using in the literature these days is that our window of tolerance shrinks. So if our baseline level of stress is just way too high for us to process and digest, that means our window of tolerance gets very, very slender, and any little thing can just set us off. I know in my own life that the times that I have acted inappropriately are exactly that I had been under stress for a long period of time. My window of tolerance had gotten so small, and my reaction to the situation in front of me was inappropriate. But it wasn't about the situation in front of me. It was about everything that's connected to. And I think you talk a little bit about that in the chapter on anger. Do you want to say anything else about that? Let's just say anger, fear, depression, anxiety, any of them, really. It's not always about what's happening in that moment. There's a lot of undigested emotions from childhood, from last week, from whatever's going on in our society, that maybe our baseline level of stress is so high and our window of tolerance is so small that we're actually reacting to many things, not just the conversation we're having with our spouse.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I guess the best thing to do, the thing that I encourage people to do is to kind of monitor themselves. So learn through self-inquiry, like whatever emotion they have more difficulty with. For me, it's really anxiety that I have trouble with. So over the years, I've learned to monitor myself when I'm stressed out. And it's not just like an intellectual thing. It's like to notice what's going on in my body. I think that's really important. So you might get some physical symptoms from the stress. I get a burning feeling in my chest when I'm really stressed out, right? And then I get insomnia. So certain symptoms are really obvious, like the insomnia. I lose my appetite, but really that burning feeling, when I get that burning feeling, that's just like a warning sign for me. So I haven't gone over the edge yet. I know what's going on beforehand. So what I always do when I start feeling that way is I really change things quickly, because I have gone over the edge and it wasn't good. And I don't want to do that again.
Standing on the edge of the cliff with one toe over.
Yeah, I'm like, no. So how do I back away? I do two things. One is I kind of change my life a little bit. So, I kind of withdraw from doing as many things as I normally do. And from doing things that I consider stressful just for a while, because then I know I'll get better. And then I just double down on my yoga for stress management practices. And by that, I'm like, that's what my practice is about. I'm doing it every day. So actually, I didn't go into that state at the beginning of the pandemic, but I looked at the situation and I was like, wow, this situation could really push me to the edge. So I actually got proactive and I doubled down, and every day I meditated for half an hour. And then at another time of day, I did legs up the wall pose for 20 minutes at least. Those are my minimum. I might do other yoga practices, and I certainly took walks outside and everything. But that's, a lot of time per day. So that's almost an hour per day minimum. But I was just doing that. It's only a case of one, as my husband is a scientist, say an N of one. But, I did pretty well. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was hearing about people who weren't sleeping and who were crying every day and all this stuff. And, I'm not saying I wasn't stressed out or didn't care, but I felt, for me, I was pretty grounded because I really focused on the stress management to prevent, like you said, that window of tolerance from getting so narrow that things would just keep pushing me over the edge. So I didn't know that term, window of tolerance, but I'll be using it.
Yeah. And, when I was listening to you talk, my mind was clicking, because I heard you say that you're at the point now, probably because of your yoga and meditation practice, where you can see it coming and you can back off, quickly change behaviors, delink yourself from people, places, and things, amp up your practice. I feel like that's a whole saluted genic model of what we want yoga and meditation to be. But I would say most of my clients, my private clients, number one, don't realize there's a connection between their baseline level of stress and what's going on in their life. Number two, don't have those signals figured out like you do, the insomnia and the burning in the chest, like that connection has not yet been made. And in fact, if I would point it out to them, they would be like, oh, no, that has nothing to do with it. Like, it's interesting to me to work with someone from being so oblivious about these signs and symptoms and the messages, as you say, the body is giving, and then slowly, and it usually for me takes about 2 to 3 years, slowly helping them get to the place where you are now. It's a long journey. How long did it take you to really figure out that your body had signals for you that were connected to your baseline level of stress and that you could do something about it? Do you remember back?
Yeah. I actually think, because it didn't involve yoga, I have had sort of an irregular journey with all these things. And I started doing yoga for exercise and I just loved it. And I really didn't know how to connect all that with all the other stuff that we've been talking about. I wasn't learning about it in my classes. And, you typically don't unless you're a teacher in a teacher training program or something, because you just get your class and then you go home and you practice like in the class. And it was good, but it wasn't really helping me at all. So it was actually my therapist who said something to me that totally made me change the way I saw everything. I was in a very stressed out state because I was working for a software startup company. I have this past that's kind of antithetical to my 21st century life. In the 20th century, I was a technical writer and I worked for a lot of software companies in the early days. And at the end in the 90s, I was working for a software startup company. I was one of the first 11 people. And it was just it was incredibly stressful job because, if we didn't succeed, the whole company was going to fail. And, it was just, everybody was panicking all the time. And I was supposed to meet someone for lunch somewhere. And I got there, he wasn't there, and he just didn't show up. And he was someone who was never late. And I got really concerned. And then I suddenly had this realization that I was at the wrong restaurant and I didn't have a car. So I ran to the restaurant. And then when I got to the restaurant, I just was crazy. I can't explain it. I just went over some edge and I was acting like a crazy person, not like angry or anything, but just like all my boundaries were gone and I was just babbling. And it was just the whole day it became very weird and I couldn't work anymore and all this stuff. So, when I talked to my therapist about it, he said, "Oh, I have a feeling that if you hadn't run down that hill, you would have been fine. That running down the hill just added all this extra adrenaline into your system and sent you over the edge." And so that was just a great insight to me. I'm sorry I can't say it had to do with yoga, but just when I heard that, I realized, and that sort of became a little mantra for me: don't run down the hill, right? When don't panic and start just
Can I stop you there for a minute, though? I think this story shows how far we've come with our understanding, because you're talking in the 1990s. That was kind of a strange foreign idea that your physiology, the running, how connected into your mental state, and that was like an aha moment, versus I think most people doing yoga today, that's like a common sense that yes, when you're off physiologically, yoga can help. Your physiology affects your mind and your emotions. It seems almost like common sense in 2022, but we're talking maybe 30 years ago. This was a brand new idea.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I think, but I think there still is a problem with this idea of the mind being separate from the body. That's really ingrained in our culture because it comes from a lot of the religions that people in the West practice. But it's actually in early yoga as well that somehow the mind is, like if you look in the Yoga Sutras, that the mind is a separate thing from the impure body. The soul is pure, the body is impure, and so on. So yeah, it's really hard to get out of that mindset that the body and the mind are not at all separate. I mean, to me, I actually now just think of my body and mind as being like one thing. There's no boundary at all. And it's just basically, my body's the part of my mind that's interacting with the world, right? It's how the mind gets information through its senses. It's how the mind takes action, and that there's no actual separation whatsoever. And that's really hard for people they're so used to this mind-body separation idea. It's really hard for them to switch into another way of thinking.
And that goes all the way back to the Bible. It goes all the way back to some of the early philosophers. Right. I mean, this is deeply ingrained in us that the body and the mind are separate. And I, for one, am so happy that both medicine, psychology, yoga, we're all starting to understand, as you said, that oneness, that your body is just the interface with the world.
Right. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of things about, like you mentioned, people taking a long time to learn and to accept. There's a lot of things about yoga and how practices affect your emotions and thoughts as well as your body. And then also just some yoga philosophy ideas that are new to people that, it's such a mindset switch. I had to do it with this friend of mine, who'd been doing Iyengar yoga for years. And I was telling him that yoga poses could affect your mood and your emotions. And he just didn't believe me. So, and I would see him every year during the summer. So one summer I said, well, I'm going to put you in this forward bend and you need to stay for a while. And, he came, I said, do you feel any different? And he said, no, I don't. Okay. So then the next year I was like, okay, now I'm going to be really serious about this. And I put him in a supported forward bend that he could hold for a really long time. And I said, you're going to stay at least 3 minutes, because that was a magic number I got from Iyengar people. And then, when he came out and he lifted his head up, I could see it in his face. I mean, I'm sure you've had that experience too, of teaching a class and seeing everyone's faces after they've done a quieting practice or pose. And then he was like, yeah, I feel it. So
I think that's so important what you just said, that we are not going to convince people of this oneness of body and mind by talking to them, because they have an opinion and, it's not going to change. But when we give them an experience, they can't deny that. Right. And that experiential learning, which is, what yoga is, according to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, yoga is experiential. I just really want to hammer that one home, because we can talk and talk and talk, but until somebody feels it, that's when their aha moment comes. And I think we all had that when we started yoga, right? That first time when we were like, what the heck is this? What just happened to me in this hour? Such a lovely moment to see on his face, I'm sure.
Yes, I love seeing that look on people's faces. And yeah, I just re-entered a room of people who had been practicing and then finished their practice. And then as I walked in the room, because someone else was teaching that, as I walked in the room, I just saw that look on everyone's faces, and I knew, and it had been an anti-anxiety sequence that I had helped write. So that was, yeah.
So can we get into this? Because, your book is about practices and meditations for moving through stress, anxiety, grief, and life transitions. And then in the very first pages, before you even get into chapter 1, it says, using this book. And then in the second paragraph, you write, maybe the most important thing I've learned about using yoga for times of change, or for that matter, yoga for any time, is that everyone is different in their abilities, their preferences, and personal approaches to yoga. So, like those one-size-fits-all outfits that never look good on me, there's no one-size-fits-all yoga that works for everyone. That's why instead of recommending a single way for practice, I'm going to provide you with a large variety of suggestions to choose from so you can discover what works best for you. So in your book, I'm seeing it like almost like, hey, here's a potential protocol. Here's a potential protocol. Here's a potential protocol. But I think you're very good at saying, look, sometimes when you're really angry, you need a very vigorous, energizing practice to kind of like push it through you. And other times you might be able to go into a very gentle, calming, soothing practice and just kind of work your way down from all of that anger. So is that kind of your intention, is to give options for people to try on themselves?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's really, really important. I think that's probably the most important message of my book, is that everyone's different and you have to find what works for you, and that different practices actually affect people differently. So you need to try them and then be very honest about whether they're working for you or not. Because there's this kind of myth, I would say, that all yoga is calming. The yoga is calming. Like a doctor might even say, oh, go do yoga, it's calming. And then somebody might go to like a power yoga class and get all charged up, or find they can't sleep after their practice. So that's an important concept, is, no, not all yoga is calming, but then also that everybody's different and different things affect people differently. So even if for example, someone might say, well, restorative yoga, that's calming, right, for everyone. Well, no, that's not actually true. Like sometimes if you're really agitated, and I've experienced this, lying down in a restorative pose is the last thing you feel like doing, and you feel like you just need to move before you can relax. Maybe you can do it later, or maybe that's just not even the right practice for you at a given time, and you should do supported inversions instead, which are more active and also calming. So there's that. I mean, I think I learned that a long time ago when we were talking about with a group of students about how poses affected them. And one of the students said, oh, twists make her sleepy. So, you could say, oh no, twists can't make you sleepy because twists are stimulating, because that's what the lore is, when you look at poses in the Iyengar system. But, if she says they make her sleepy, they do, right? So people also have to trust how they're reacting to things and search for what actually does work for them, even if it's sort of unconventional. And that is why I offer so many suggestions. And then, also end with my motto saying, if it's not working for you, it's not working for you. So, because people like, I hear students say, oh, I don't understand, I'm doing this breath practice and it's supposed to calm me and it's not working. It's not calming me. What's wrong with me? And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. That's just not working for you right now. So like, what else could you try that might work? So that's really important too.
I think in our pre-interview email exchange, I had told you, I think this is, for me, this is the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast. I think this is where yoga therapy, it is really astounding that we can help people co-assess. I call it a co-assessment with the student. How are you feeling? Do you feel like you need to discharge and energize, or do you feel like you need to soothe and pacify? And really through that initial yoga therapy assessment, which can be done with an individual or a small group, helping them figure out which direction they want to go with it and what does work for them. The theory doesn't always match up with the experience. So I think I told you that I love your book, and I think your book and your message is one of the most potent promoters of why yoga therapy might be needed to help people understand this, because it's actually kind of difficult to understand on your own why twists make me sleepy, right? Like why is that? But I do believe through yoga therapy, we can help people understand why these poses might have this effect, but on a different day or a different season or a different stage of life, it may have a completely different effect. So I don't think you wrote the book with that in mind, but because it is the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast, I just wanted to put that in there.
Mm-hmm. No, I didn't really write it for yoga therapists per se, but I probably actually have been influenced a little bit by yoga therapy because I did help Timothy McCall with his book, Yoga as Medicine. And that's from quite a number of years ago now. And the message of that one really is that each person's different and needs a customized practice. So I edited the book before the editor saw it. And then I worked on the instructions. I'm writing the instructions for how to do the poses. And I worked on the photo shoot. I just want to say what I did. But, so I got really involved in reading the whole book and thinking about it and talking to him about it because we were working together a lot at that time. So, I was influenced by that yoga therapy approach. And I have been since then. I'm influenced by my own experience of, noticing I don't react to things the way you're supposed to sometimes. And people I know also don't. But then I also do know that the approach of having a personalized and customized solution for you is the only thing that really works. And, I just hope we can empower people to understand that and to do some of it on their own as well, because, it's great to go to a yoga therapist. I'm sure it's just really a profound experience. But at a certain point, especially if you're not going every day, you need to start to internalize some of those things, right? Mm-hmm. So that if you have a day, when you're feeling near the edge, you like I described about myself, that you can start noticing it and then remember, oh, my yoga therapist said here, here's how to double down. That would be a good thing to give for yoga therapists to give people too, is oh, here's your normal practice and here's a doubling down practice. Things are really bad. So then, but they still need to be able to recognize in themselves, when it's time to double down and, and to do
and
that.
I think that is the goal of yoga therapy, is that we're teaching people how to recognize those experiences. Like your psychologist said, I don't think that would have happened if you hadn't run downhill.
Right.
I think that's what a yoga therapist is doing, is connecting the mind and the body and helping each client understand themselves. I don't even think it's about giving them, walking them through a practice, like come to me and I'll walk you through a practice. I think it is much more of this exploration of the body-mind connection and what do I do when I get to the edge and what are the lifestyle habits I can shift for myself, So I think it's interesting. You say this book is not about yoga therapy, but my opinion, Nina, after reading it, is it actually is yoga therapy. Maybe you don't want to hear that, but.
Well, I guess I don't want to hear that. I'll tell you what, I just feel I just want to be humble and honest. And I'm not a trained yoga therapist. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't given private lessons to students who have conditions like anxiety, and I haven't made suggestions from listening to them. And I have an example in the book of 2 different students who had anxiety, and I gave them very different things to do based on their lifestyles and what they liked and what worked for them and so on. So I use that to illustrate how things need to be different for everybody. So I have had that experience, but I just want to be careful, I think, not to claim being a yoga therapist, because I'm not a certified yoga therapist or even one of those I have some friends who are grandfathered in, even though they haven't had the training. So I think that's just the main reason why I'm cautious. So I accept what you said, but I just don't want to claim to be a yoga therapist myself.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I think there's this really big discussion going on in the yoga community about what is yoga therapy, where do they cross over, where are they similar, where are they different? And just to say that this connection of emotions like stress, anxiety, grief, and life's transitions, that falls squarely in both camps, right? I think the big difference is doing a formal assessment, setting goals together, and tracking progress over time. That falls more in the yoga therapy.
Right.
So, I just wanted to point that out because I don't have just regular yoga people come on the show because it's the Yoga Therapy Hour, but I felt that your book was so closely connected to yoga therapy that I thought it was a good match for us. So I really wanted to go back and revisit the concept of anger, because we've on the show talked a lot about anxiety and depression and fear, but anger is something that I find people don't want to talk about. They don't want to admit that they're having it. Somehow in their minds, they're a bad person if they get angry. But a lot of what you write about in your book about anger is that it actually can be a protective and positive thing. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, definitely. I decided during the writing of this book, I think that's one thing that I learned, and it partly came from talking to this friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, Dr. Scott Lozay, who also teaches mindfulness, about some of these emotions. And I just want to stop using the term negative emotions that people fall into. They talk about emotions being positive and negative emotions are like ones you're not supposed to have, especially anger because it's violent or whatever. But on the other hand, we evolve with all these emotions for a reason. Anger is a healthy signal too, just like all of our other emotions. Whether it's an emotion about something good, or whether it's an emotion that we should be scared of something, or whether it's emotion that makes us angry, because anger alerts us to a potential threat that's physical, emotional, or both. And that threat could be to you personally, or it could be to a group of people that you care about, or to your family, or to, your country, or to the world as well. So what I'll just say is, like, maybe you're angry at the way the government treats certain groups of people, or maybe you're angry at a person who drives really badly in your neighborhood because they might kill someone. There's people going through the stop sign at my intersection down the street. There's a 4-way stop sign, and I don't know, people just got worse driving during the pandemic, and they're just driving right through it. They're not even slowing down. And I know people have been hit there, so that makes me angry, right? So, that's not a terrible feeling. It's a feeling that says, there's a danger here. Like, what can you do about it? And there's peaceful ways of acting on anger. Like, you can engage in social activism, but, like that action where we organized in the neighborhood to try to do something about this dangerous traffic situation. So, or, maybe you want to give money toward some cause or work on the environment because you're angry at what some irresponsible companies and people are doing to our world. So yeah, anger can be a positive force for change, right? So I think that's really important. So again, when we talked about kind of listening to your painful emotions, whatever they are, with you said with your thinking brain as opposed to your emotional brain, that it's important to listen when you're angry to see, like, why am I angry? Is this some kind of reaction to some injustice that's happening, or some real threat? And do I need to take action? Or is it some sort of, sometimes we get our buttons pushed because the situation that we're in reminds us of another situation, like, from our childhood, or, so that's where we get in, you know what I mean? Or like, I have an example in my book of a person who grew up in a very angry household with a father who had PTSD and alcoholism. And, so they're just like they just fall into these patterns. And, using that brain to like decide whether this feeling you're having, just like fear or anxiety, is this based on a real situation in front of me? Or am I just having some automatic anger reaction that's not appropriate to the circumstance in front of me? So I think that's really important. And, again, if you're just in a rage or whatever and can't think clearly before you're able to look at your thoughts, because you do tend to, and like you said, when your window of tolerance was so low, you just went off, you couldn't really control that. So you do need to like calm yourself down from that. So before you can listen, sometimes you need to quiet yourself down. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation, possible ways would be to work out your anger first by doing a really active practice, kind of expel the extra energy and then calm down. Or, if you're just, maybe your energy just all went away after your blast of anger and you just want to like rest and calm down, you could do a calming practice like that instead. There's some ideas.
So what I heard you say, though, is that anger can be a motivator. It can be a message that something is off. It can be almost a protector.
Right.
And that, we can determine, hopefully, if we're not too angry and can't control ourselves, we can determine which direction we're going to take that anger in. There was one other quote I wanted to read out of your book because I think it's really interesting. And I hope I'm saying the name right. It's on page 91 with Dr. Scott Laze.
Laze, yeah.
So here's what he says. Although we tend to consider anger, especially to be a negative emotion, it's actually a healthy signal that alerts us to potential threat. Dr. Scott Laze says, the way I think about it, anger is a normal response to certain situations and even a healthy one. And expressing that in a skillful way is normal and important. And I just wanted to stress that anger actually can be very healthy. It can alert us to the fact that someone stepped over our boundaries. It can alert us to the fact that I didn't really say what I wanted to say, and now I'm ruminating about it for 3 days, or I allowed someone to treat me in a way that I don't like, and I don't want to do that anymore. To think of anger as a healthy response, to me, that opened up so many doors. How about you? Do you think of it that way sometimes?
Well, that was kind of a new idea to me, really. So, I went through an interesting learning process as I was writing the book. I have so many amazing friends and resources in my life. I'm so grateful to them. And I reached out to a lot of people and I was able to interview them and talk with them. And, as I thought about this, it was very powerful to me. Like I said, I just changed all my thoughts about the so-called negative emotions. And, I used to use that word before, and now I just never even use it. And yeah, I think about it all the time when I see now when I feel anger and when I see other people get angry and to try to understand, what's going on there. Yeah, I think it's
such
really
a big deal. Like when I used to feel angry, I would be like,
ashamed.
Be ashamed of yourself. You shouldn't act like that. And then to have this other door open that, wow, you're having a healthy response to a dysfunctional situation. Sometimes, sometimes my anger is because of my desire and my unmet expectations,
right.
And me creating my own suffering. But there are other times that my boundaries have really been trampled on. Mm-hmm. And to have that opening to say, I'm being healthy by determining that, I have a right to feel angry and I can do whatever I want with that. I can have a conversation. I can do a vigorous practice. I can soothe myself, but I have the sovereignty to decide how I'm going to meet my anger. That was a big deal for me.
That's great. I mean, I think the trick is with anger that makes it a little more complex, maybe not, deciding with that phrase he used, responding skillfully. I think that's like the key, because if you believe in nonviolence and also you understand like the reason for that, because acting in a violent, angry way just sort of perpetuates violence and anger, that responding skillfully is key. Having the feeling, exploring why you're having the feeling, and then deciding what to do about it. So, in my book, what I do is I remind people about the yamas as possible guidelines for how to respond. So there are ways to respond skillfully, and that means, not by attacking or being violent or causing more harm, because that just perpetuates things and makes it worse, but finding a way to, make your stand or act, peace. Well, I mean, Gandhi's the perfect example of that, right? He was fighting against the wrongs that the British Empire did to the country of India through nonviolence. And also he said he felt anger, not at the English people, but at the situation, right? Not at the British people themselves. So, he did have a feeling of injustice and anger that he channeled into nonviolent, peaceful protest. So, yeah, I mean,
and
that's.
shutting the economy down. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
important, especially in the times that we are in right now, with so many people angry at the Supreme Court and all that's going on. We are going to have to find skillful action. And it may be similar to Gandhi, everything from peaceful protest to shutting certain parts of our economy down by refusing to buy from these companies. Or, there's a lot of ways to do it that don't involve hurting our own nervous system and immune system and mental health, and don't involve being violent towards others. We as yogis, we should be able to figure out this skillful action just like Gandhi did.
I hope so. Yeah, I think that's an important message because, when I talk about accepting change, I don't mean that you should just say, oh, well, that's how it is, I shouldn't do anything about it. That's a really important message of the book, too, because I think a lot of people feel like, oh, you should just be okay with everything and that's yoga somehow. But actually standing up for what's right. And I use the example of Arjuna and the Bhagavad Gita. Standing up for what's right is part of the yogic path and karma yoga and all that. So taking those, being a social activist, working for the good of the world and all that is an important part of yoga as well. And so that's related to anger, I think, because there's anger at injustice, there's anger at, the state of the world, there's anger at humanity being threatened, for our survival, or, and also whatever nature. So yeah. So the trick is to figure out.
It's so hard as an individual to decide what the skillful action for me or you is, because I think each person has different gifts and challenges, yes, resources. So determining how can I contribute to, skillfully to the things I want to see different or see change. I think that's where the rubber really hits the road, and then not burning yourself out trying to do it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And like right now, I feel sort of unclear about what I'm going to do, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to figure out some things eventually. But yeah, and it's been an issue for me in a way because, I have a neighbor who's like really into like political organizing and everything, and writing postcards and calling people on the phone to get them to vote. And that's just not, I'm not good at trying to do that. So, I do my work in other ways by writing and helping individuals. I'm better at helping an individual than trying to organize a group or whatever. But yeah, it's a trick to figure out, as you said, like, what is the right way for you to respond to situations.
And everybody has their opinion that if you're not doing the postcards, you must be lazy and not care. Like, it's really hard to get criticized for finding your skillful way forward when other people think you should be doing something else. I find that interesting, but that's another topic for another day.
Yes.
So let's wrap it up here. You said you had a few closing thoughts about yoga for times of change.
Yeah, you talked about how long it takes people, your students, to kind of get the understanding of what's going, that, they can understand how their body and nervous system is affecting their mental state. So that's important because I also acknowledge that. But I think, so I want to encourage people by saying that becoming steadier and calmer in the face of life's ups and downs just makes your whole life easier and happier even. So I really think it's worth putting in the effort to find the right practices for you and to practice regularly.
Bring that baseline level of stress down.
Right. Yeah. So taking the effort to find them, because it involves some exploration time, and then committing to time practicing as well, and practicing over time, because it does take time. So that's an important message, because I just think it's worth that. I hope people don't get overwhelmed by thinking, oh, I have to, it's too much to practice every day. I'm too busy. I just think it's worth it.
100%. It's like that old adage, a stitch in time saves nine. I think people don't understand that when we have a stressful spin out day where you can no longer think straight and you're not making good decisions and you're saying things you have no business saying, well, if you'd done your practice in the morning, maybe that spin out wouldn't have happened, right? That you're actually investing in yourself by taking that time to practice and saving time that maybe you wouldn't have to spend because you didn't flip out that day, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And plus you probably sleep better. So
I just feel happier. Who doesn't want to feel happier?
Yeah.
It seems like a luxury to take time to practice, but it's actually not a luxury. It's just as important as eating.
Yeah, I mean, I realized that for me because I did have some serious problems that I just feel like, I hope and wish other people will realize it too, that it really can change your life for the better. And I also think that starting small is good. So I have this book that's full of so many suggestions. It could be overwhelming, I think. So first of all, I don't think people even need to read the whole book. If they're interested in a particular topic, it kind of organizes so there's a little repetition. So that if you go to a certain section and just read that, it'll not only tell you what you know, but it might send you to another part of the book to read as well. So just, look up the topic that interests you and pick one or two things to start practicing and see how they go. Because really, even having one or two things that you can practice in your daily life is enough if they're working. You don't need to do all the stuff, right? So I think that's important. And then, of course, if you only read the parts of the book that interest you now, you can always come back later. If something you're doing isn't working and you want something else, or something new has come up for you and you want to learn about that. So I just wanted people to understand that's how they can use the book, that it's not necessary to do all the practices or read from cover to cover and so on.
Yeah. I always read like 6 or 7 books simultaneously. So I love this kind of book where you can, I'm having an angry day. What does it say about anger?
Right. Right.
I didn't sleep last night. I feel so anxious. What does it say about that? I love that kind of it's almost like a tip sheet, or a cliff notes of here's some things you can think about.
Yeah. So I did organize it that way and purpose. And that was, I came from my technical writing background. I learned how to organize information in such a way that people could either read it cover to cover or just go to the parts that concern them and figure out what to do from there. So,
and Nina, your publisher is Shambhala.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So where can people get the book?
Well, it's actually available for most booksellers online. So whether that's Penguin Random House has a lot of options. Actually, it has several buttons that you can use, but it's available from everything from Amazon to Powell's Books to IndieBound to, you can just Google it. If you want to support your local bookstore too, you could actually just go there and ask them or phone them and ask them to order it for you. So it depends on how you want to spend your money or whether you want to get a discount or whatever. So pretty much, I'm not saying that every bookstore you stop in is going to have it, but
I'm also putting on the screen, because this podcast also comes on YouTube and is a video podcast, but I'm just putting here the Shambhala publications that it is sold through them also.
Yeah, you can buy it directly from Shambhala if you like. So,
and do you have a website, Nina?
I do. It's called yogafortimesofchange.com. And the Yoga for Healthy Aging blog is actually there. So there's a lot of information there, 10 years worth of information on the blog about both Yoga for Times of Change and Yoga for Healthy Aging concepts, and information about the books. There you are. There's companion videos to go with the book as well, which I'm just thrilled about. I've always kind of dreamed about how great it would be if you did a book and then all the practices in the book were on video somewhere done by, in this case, Barry Risman did them. She was the model for the book and is somebody I work with a lot. And so that's great if you want to be led through by the teacher. Yeah. Video classes.
Great.
Yeah.
That's really kind of unique to have a book full of sequences that you can also come and see the video taking you through that sequence. I think that's a really amazing model.
I was really happy that you wanted to do it. So
that's great. Well, thank you, Nina, for coming today to talk to us about yoga for times of change. I think it's something that's on everyone's mind, and the mental health, I call it the mental health pandemic, is now upon us. We have the COVID pandemic, and now the mental health pandemic is alive and well. And I think most people are suffering some type of anxiety, depression, fear, insomnia, anger. So I think your book is really beautifully timed for the needs of society right now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it was wonderful to talk with you and finally meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you too. Thanks for coming. I'm reflecting on this interview with Nina, and the thing that really stands out to me is how us yoga people and yoga therapists, we have learned so much information. We've, basically gotten a master's degree in yoga, but the people that we're working with are in a very different place than us. And I think when we learn all of this information in yoga therapy school, or even through, becoming a high-level yoga teacher, we want to give it all right away and use all these amazing things we've learned. And listening to Nina brought me back to the very beginning of the very first group yoga class that I had taken. And the reason I went there is because I had moved to California, which has 6 lanes of traffic that you're driving down the freeway. And you have to maneuver through 6 lanes of traffic to get wherever you're going. But my neck was so tight, I could not turn my head to look over my right shoulder to check the lane to see if it was safe to get into the next lane. And so after about a month of living in California back in 1996, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do something about my neck because I can't drive safely here. So I went to a yoga class and I was bored out of my mind. I had been a high-level athlete in college, high jump, long jump, shot put, hurdles, 800, 200, and javelin. I was a heptathlete. And this slow, boring yoga class where they were doing lots of breathing, and I had no idea what this was about. I didn't like it. The first one I walked out and I was like, oh my God, who are those people and what are they doing? And then a little bit later, I had to come back because I still couldn't drive safely because of my neck not being able to turn. And then something happened, kind of like what Nina described to the gentleman that she had put in a supported forward bend. Something happened to me that second time that I felt different. And I was like, oh, there's something going on here. I had this aha moment that there was something here I needed to understand. And I remember going to the teacher saying, explain to me what just happened. I don't get it. I feel different, but I want to know. And at that time, back in the late 80s, early 90s, people didn't have polyvagal theory. They didn't understand the connection between the nervous system and, the emotions. We didn't have all this research that we have today. And she really couldn't explain it to me. But that is to say, most of the people we are meeting, that's where they are even today in 2022. Their mind is about to be blown when they have this experience of what we call sattva. And they don't have all this information that we have. So why I think that's important is to remind us to go back to beginner's mind and try to remember what it's like to not understand the body-mind connection, to not remember or even know that there is a body-mind connection. Most of the people we meet don't know about that yet. And so it's a great reminder to me that instead of bombarding people with really high-level knowledge, maybe just plant little seeds here and there to help them understand that when their physiology is off, their mental state might be off, and vice versa. And just give little tiny seeds and then let those seeds, grow into beautiful flowers one day. All right. So it all boils down to beginner mind. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next week. Please don't forget to sign up for our newsletter mailing list, where we give you a free gift every single week. It's usually something that the guest has been talking about, like a book chapter or an article or an infographic. Check out the show notes for that. Thank you for listening today. Don't forget, we have a new YouTube channel called Optimal State with Amy Wheeler. We also have a new Patreon page where you can support us to bring you the most excellent content, and that is Optimal State and the Yoga Therapy Hour Patreon page. Also, you could write us a review on most major platforms that host podcasts. Give us 5 stars if you appreciate the show, and tell us what you love so that we can do more of that. Finally, we support several nonprofit organizations through this podcast. See the show notes to understand how you can help. If you'd like to be a guest or a sponsor for this program, contact us at the email welcome@theoptimalstate.com. welcome@theoptimalstate.com. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.